Привет! Как дела? I want to remind you that if you're a total beginner and you're puzzled with what to start learning Russian with so that you can start speaking ASAP and you can also understand what you're saying, you can just follow the videos here in the right order, starting with the playlist 1 or the Russian alphabet video in the uploads. Today you'll learn about 2 ways of referring to a person in Russian: greeting them, apologizing, and then switching from formal to informal way of speaking. You might already heard that in Russian we have 2 ways of talking to a person: formal and informal. And for that, you'll use 2 different pronouns: вы and ты. Now, first of all, вы is used when talking to 2 or more people in Russian. And it's also used when talking to one person in a polite way. You would normally say вы to someone you've never met before, or to someone older than you, or to your manager at work. And you will say ты to your friend, or to someone of your age, or to someone in an informal situation in general. If you speak French, there is nothing new in it for you. It's the same as when you say vous to several people or to someone in a polite way, and you say tu to your friend. These rules are slightly different for kids and teenagers. If you're 16 years old or younger, you will say вы to anyone who is older than you. And if you're talking to someone of your age, even if you've never met them before, you would still say ты. At Russian schools, pupils usually say вы to a teacher, and a teacher says ты to a pupil. And at Russian universities, both professors and students say вы to each other. For a foreigner, it's not that crucial if sometimes, mistakenly, you would use ты instead of вы. People will understand, but you should still keep in mind that if you say ты to a Russian official, it may immediately sound insulting, unless they asked you to do so. Now let's look at 2 ways you can greet someone in Russian. If you are in a formal situation, you would usually say здравствуйте. It comes from the word that means health in Russian, здоровье, or здравие, as people used to say before. And it means I wish you to be healthy. I wish you health. Now let's break it into syllables and read it exaggerating the stressed syllable. Remember this approach for reading long and challenging words that I mentioned in my previous video? Здравствуйте. The first V here is silent. Здравствуйте. Здравствуйте. Try it out several times this way and you'll get it right. Sometimes instead of здравствуйте, you may hear здрасте or even здрасте. It's more like a slang word, and it happens because of reduction of vowels in syllables. We also discussed it in the previous video. So it's good to recognize this word, but when speaking Russian, it's still better to say здравствуйте. When you're greeting someone informally, you would usually say привет. We had this word in our dialogue. Привет. Now let's have a quick check. Let's say you're an adult, 18 or older. How would you greet an official at the airport? Right, you will say здравствуйте. And if you're at a restaurant and greeting a waiter, you will still say здравствуйте. If you're checking into a hotel, what would you say to a person on reception? Again, you will say здравствуйте. If there is a person doing their job, you would usually say здравствуйте. And what would you say to a colleague of your age, someone that you see every day? You would probably say привет. What about asking a taxi driver or someone passing by to show you the road? Would you refer to them as вы or ты? When you're approaching someone you don't know for the first time, you say вы to them. But if it's a kid, it's perfectly normal to say ты. And if you're at a bar, talking to someone of more or less your age, would you say вы or ты? So, being at a bar implies an informal situation itself, but sometimes it depends. If you're a girl, it's okay to say ты to people. If you're a guy talking to another guy, it's also okay to say ты. But if you're a guy talking to a girl, though it's not that crucial, but it's still polite to start with вы. Why it happens and what does it mean? When you're saying вы to a person, you're creating some kind of space between you and them. You're showing that you're not trying to get into their boundaries too soon. And when you're saying ты, you're attempting to kind of shorten this distance. So if you're trying to keep the distance, you say вы. And if you're trying to be more informal, you say ты. A little further in this video, we'll talk about switching from formal to informal way of speaking, from saying вы to saying ты. The same way as greeting someone, there are also a formal and informal way of saying bye. A common formal way is до свидания. You read it as one word. Свидание in Russian means a moment in time when you see someone, and it also means a date. So you're literally saying till the next time we see each other. A common informal way of saying bye is пока. We also had this word in the dialogue. And to remind you of another way of saying bye from the dialogue, you can also say увидимся. Now, when approaching someone in the street, instead of здравствуйте, you'd rather say excuse me. Извините. Извините is used in most situations for saying both excuse me and I'm sorry. And you may also hear another word, простите. But it has a slightly different connotation. It rather means I'm sorry for something bad that I've already done. And an informal way for saying excuse me is извини. Both извините and извини are imperatives grammatically, as well as здравствуйте. And you can notice a common pattern here. The difference between them is that a formal imperative ends with te. And if we remove te, we will get an informal imperative, извини. Let's look at another example. To say bless you when someone sneezes, you say будьте здоровы. Будьте ends with te. This is how you can tell it's formal. Or you can also say it to several people when they're sneezing at the same time, I guess. So to make it informal, you would remove te and you get будь. And it also depends on who you are saying it to, a woman or a man. If it's a man, you would say будь здоров. And if it's a woman, you would say будь здорова. And did you also notice that the second word in this phrase kind of reminds of the word здравствуйте? It's because здоров, здорова, здоровый means healthy in Russian, and the whole phrase means a wish. Be healthy. And finally, we arrived at the point where we'll talk about switching from formal to informal way of speaking. Let's say you've been talking to someone for a while and you see that they're friendly and you're both down to switch to more informal communication. So one of you may offer, let's switch to saying ты, which basically means let's be friends, let's get closer, let's be more informal. In Russian, it sounds as давайте на ты. You may also hear a slightly longer version. Давайте перейдем на ты. Both mean the same. Перейдем means switch. And you can remember the one that you like more. Once again, давайте на ты. To answer that, a person would usually say давайте. The word давайте itself means a call to do something. Let's do this. Let's switch to saying ты. If we remove те in the end, we will get an informal way for saying let's do something. Давай. It actually has several meanings, and let's do this is only one of them. People say давай as an encouragement for go, move, do this. So you can often hear it on the road. Давай, давай, go, go, move. Or at a sports game. Many people say давай to finish a conversation instead of saying пока. Ну все, давай. Alright, bye. And you can also hear давай for cheers. It's actually a Hollywood myth that Russians say nazdrov'ye for cheers. You would rather say nazdrov'ye for you're welcome. In Russian-speaking countries, when people are drinking, they're usually drinking to something. To your new job, to your new car, to all the best in your life. To you, за тебя. To us, за нас. And if they have nothing special to drink to, they would just say, ну, давай. That's it for today. I hope you've learned something new. And the next time, I'll teach you the most important phrase that you will need for going to Russia.